We've got a few minutes now. We'll open the floor. You can ask as many questions as you want.
I stress this, I'm a student of knowledge as well, so I can only share my experience, and if it's something, when I was taught Islam, I was taught that to say I don't know is half of knowledge, so please, if I do say that, I really mean that, so if you ask something that's beyond my, my little sphere, then I will, not in a rude way, but just say I don't know. I hope you won't take offense.
Okay. If anyone feels shy, everyone put their hands up, and if anyone wants to write, please. Sister.
I thought your talk was really touching and really inspirational. I'm learning Arabic to continue.
So this I can answer because I say this to my students every single time. You see, the Quran, there's a promise in the Quran that says, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ, and actually take it. And many scholars, in explaining this verse, they say min taysir al-Quran, from the taysir lughatihi, that from the facilitation of the Quran is also the facilities. For example, the way you take your courses, give specific time for it, right? And in that specific time, make sure you focus solely and 100% on it. But there's also there's the three things I always say too long is that try and honor three things. This is what I was taught in Damascus when I was learning. They said, first, honor the knowledge that you're learning, which is, and how do you honor your knowledge? There are three levels here. Number one, you memorize it. That's the least. You memorize and understand it. The second thing is that you practice it. So when you learn anything in Arabic, practice, contextualize it. You learn a word, waladun, say something with waladun. Huwa waladun, ana waladun. You won't say that, but someone else will say that. So that, just contextualize it and practice it. And then the final thing, the highest stage of any knowledge is to teach it. Right? And if you can't teach it, maybe your friend or whatever say, you know what, I just learned a new word today. What I did, teach it to someone. So that's one thing, honor your knowledge. The second thing I was taught is to honor the source of your knowledge if you want barakah. So whoever teaches you, there's an honor that person deserves. And by honoring that person, from a religious perspective, there will be barakah, there will be blessings in what you learn. So you should adapt to your teacher. One of the first poems I was taught in Damascus was قُلْ لِلْمُعَلِّمِ وَقِّهِ تَبْجِيلًا كَادَ الْمُعَلِّمُ أَنْ يَكُونَ رَسُولًا. That, I never demand this from my students, by the way, but this is what I was taught. He said, stand up for your teacher and show them immense respect. كَادَ الْمُعَلِّمُ أَنْ يَكُونَ رَسُولًا. A teacher is almost like a prophet, because all prophets were sent as teachers. Okay? So honor the source of your knowledge. And then finally, from a religious perspective, keep away from sins. Because sins has an effect on, when you learn something from a religious perspective, then sins have an effect on that. Imam Shafi'i once composed a poem about knowledge, and he says, شَكَوْتِ لِوَكِيعٍ عَنْ سُوءِ حِفْظِي فَأَرْشَدَنِي إِلَى تَرْكِ الْمَعَاصِي فَقَالَ اِعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْعِلْمَ نُورٌ وَنُورُ اللَّهِ لَا يُؤْتَى لِعَاصٍ. He said, I complained to Waki', who was his teacher, about my poor memory. And Imam Shafi'i, I don't know whether you know this, was someone who would read a page one, complain about his poor memory. And he said, فَأَرْشَدَنِي إِلَى تَرْكِ الْمَعَاصِي. And he instructed me to keep away from sins. وَقَالَ اِعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْعِلْمَ نُورٌ. He said, know that knowledge is light. وَنُورُ اللَّهِ لَا يُؤْتَى لِعَاصٍ. And the light of God is never given to a pertinent sinner. So it's not that you don't sin, but someone who is pertinent and not repentant. So those are three things generally from a religious perspective that I've been taught when it comes to knowledge. You prioritize your knowledge, you honor the source of your knowledge, and inshallah, like you pray for anything else, pray for God to make it easy for you. And if you do that, inshallah, you'll be an opening.
Assalamu alaikum, brother. Brother, I've got a question. What it is if you're reading the Arabic, how do you discover the meaning?
So, are you saying as someone who understands the language or someone who doesn't?
Doesn't, for example.
Then you're reliant on translation.
Oh, okay.
It's impossible to, if you don't understand the language, then if you see a word, you can't go back to its root, you can't decipher what its roots word is, for example. So for example, if I look into here and I see, for example, yuharrifun, right? I would know that from yuharrifun, I would need to check into understand the language. And that's what I said that, I'm not against translations, but I'm for people recognizing the limitations contained in translations. You have to recognize, of course, translations have to be there for people who might never have the time to access the language. right? But some argue that, you know what, just like I told you, if I gave you 2 million and you realize 10 years later that, wait a minute, he actually gave you 200 million and I gave you 2 million, you'll feel cheated. You feel, what has he done to me, right? Even though you liked the 2 million, you benefited from the 2 million, you probably bought a house and whatever it is with it, but you still feel, God, I've been cheated here. I could have had 200 million. And that's what you could have had with the Arabic language if you know it and actually access it directly. And it has a transfer, you know, anyone who understands the Arabic language and is reading the Quran and is all praying, of course, like with any language, I can speak and still not bother to think about what I'm saying, right? But if you understand the language and you're thinking about it, it throws you to a different level. You know, you read it and you're totally involved in it. Every single hair on your body is involved in what you're doing.
So, brother, on that point, I'm just a bit confused because I'm trying to gain understanding. Okay, so say for example that I'm reading the Quran in Arabic, but I'm trying to gain understanding. I don't know what these alphabets mean and that. So
You have to learn the language.
you have to learn the language. So you've learned the language, but to get the understanding, isn't that something separate or?
So when you say understanding, what you will get from the Quran, if you don't understand the language, is a translation of what it is. But to understand what that translation means, you have to sit down in a class of tafsir, in a class of exegesis of the Quran. And you have to sit down in front of a scholar, hopefully who has, you know, an unbroken chain, who will be able to take you through what this meanings actually, what they mean. And especially because how to apply it in your time. You know, because many tafsir books were written at different times. And how they expressed it, the Quran, one of the scholars say, Al-Quran yufassaru thumma yufassaru thumma yub'athu liyawm al-qiyamah ka'annahu lam yufassar. You know, the Quran is explained and explained, and you find so many tafsir books, and then on the day of judgment, when they bring it out, it's as if no one has ever explained it, right? Because it has meanings every single time, right? It has meanings that apply to every single age. You know, there are some things in Arabic language which the Sahaba couldn't relate with, you know, because it didn't happen at their time. But now it's happening, right? وَالْخَيْلَ وَالْبِغَالَ وَالْحَمِيرَ لِتَرْكَبُوهَا وَزِينَةً وَيَخْلُقُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. As Allah says, when Allah speaks of modes of transport in the Quran, He says, and horses and mules and all these things, so that you can ride on them, and beautifications. And then He says, وَيَخْلُقُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And He's creating what you don't know. Now we know what they didn't know, right? We know that apart from horses and all of that, there's going to be horses, right? Okay, so we know there are going to be other modes of transport. So the Arabic language, to understand it, you know, the way I have understood every single thing I've learned is by sitting down in front of a teacher, and then he goes through a tafsir. And luckily for me, I happen to have teachers who also know the place where I am, so they can give me advice that are directed, you know, to how I can actually live and implement what I've learned in where I am at the moment. Because as you will find with many scholars of the past, you know, Imam Shafi'i, for example, he gave different fatwa when he was in Iraq and in Egypt, you know, because every aspect of the Quran should be applied. Well, not every aspect, but the Quran, right, you'll find that from a religious perspective, it should be applied to a culture. Culture is one of the ways you actually interpret the Quran based on Allah.
So, brother, just to relay that back to you. So, what you're basically trying to say is to sit with a scholar to get an understanding. So it's not the case of where you could just know how to read the Arabic and get an understanding for yourself, is it? So it's a lot more deeper than that, isn't it? Or?
It's 10 times more.
Okay.
But having said that, though, there is an aspect of the Quran which, you know, this is now beyond the realms of any human being, because Allah says, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ. Have piety and God will teach you. Okay? So there is an aspect of the Quran that you read and it resonates to you, and it has a certain meaning that's applicable to you, and it's as if you're being spoken to directly. And sometimes you don't need the Arabic language for this. Is if you approach the Quran with the right mentality, it does that to you. Now the scholars say that when that happens to you, you're not allowed to actually go around and start, you know, preaching based on those meanings that come directly to you. You know, that's potentially for you. Yes, you cross-check that with the teacher and just make sure that it's not your ego whispering to you. But, you know, that can happen. And however, on a majority level, the vast majority of us have to sit down. Students in the past who have said, if only I had found this course first, after going through many other courses. You know, but, you know, having said that, you know, that's how I did it. how, anybody else, I don't know whether anyone else, will have the same time that I had. For me, the opportunity was there because I was a student when I started, and till date, every now and then when I still teach the course at weekends, so that for me is a revision basically, and I use that to revise. But that's what I did.
So do you have like a website, or do you have like
So
somewhere
if
where
you,
can get
from scratch, if you don't know the language at all, if you don't know from Alif to how to read the language at all, then usually you find that many local mosques offer to teach you how to actually read alone, right? Most local mosques will teach you how to do that. If anyone is serious, I usually say that maybe, okay, sorry, but I think, but that's that from scratch. If you can learn how to actually read, then the course that I teach now takes you from being able to read to understanding the language, basically. But to learn how to read, I think they're going to announce something that there's been a service, and I think it's a very, very good service if that, if that, can be given. But that will give you, once you can read, then the course, if you want to check it out, I think they will announce it later. It's MisbahInstitute, IPN JAPAL.
Just to quickly add to that,
Yes.
at the end of the service and stuff, we're going to announce that basically, if you're interested in learning Arabic from the basic level, from Alif from basic letters, we are registering interest from MisbahInstitute. Please, at the moment, you will know him, handsome man at the back. Please leave your email, your details, and we will be starting a course inshallah in the coming months.
And it's never too late to start learning, by the way. I know, I don't know whether you all heard about the story of Maurice Bucaille, who was a French professor who was about 50-something years old. Some student from Saudi Arabia gave him some verses of the Quran, and he translated